Okay, tankerage. The whole idea is, how do you want to tank it?
You want to tanker fuel so you save money.
It's all about money. Because you know we can't want to carry fuel if it isn't going to save us money. Okay, so there's a problem though with figuring out whether it's worthwhile to tanker or not. Okay, because you can't just look at the price, the difference in the price of fuel and say, oh, fuel's cheaper over here, so we'll buy it there. Or that it's less expensive here, it's going to be more expensive, so fill it up. Because guess what? It costs you money to carry that extra weight, right? And if you don't take into account the amount that it costs you to carry the additional, you may actually be losing money. So you must always take into account the cost of carrying the stuff. And the other thing that plays into this is there's no point in carrying more than you're going to need, because once you get down there and fly back, now gas is cheap again. Okay, so if you put on more than you need to get back, you may be wasting money again. Okay? So with that in mind, a fellow who used to fly for Air Canada by the name of Ray English had this idea that he could save Air Canada a lot of money by creating a little program that looked at the fuel price, knew what the payload was, estimated what the winds would be, and for any given city pair would look at the fuel prices and figure out whether or not there was any benefit to tankering. Okay? Because the way Air Canada had been doing it was that once a month somebody would sit down in the back room with a little Jepson calculator and try and estimate whether or not there was any benefit on particular routes to tankering. And the problem with that is that if you do it wrong, you wind up losing more than you can save if you do it right. I mean, one little example I typically use in demonstrations is we put in price from fuel prices, typical fuel prices for a trip from Toronto to Miami. And if you tanker from here to Miami, you save $180. But if you tanker from Miami to here, you lose $350. Okay? So there can be big differences. So it pays to do it right. But there's a lot of money to be saved in tankering, because fuel prices are quite different. And for Ward Air, when we did this, there was one particular flight from here to Port-au-Prince in Haiti, which they flew twice a week, and they could save themselves $6,000 per trip. That's a lot of money. Now, the important thing about that money is it's money you didn't spend. Okay? And so essentially it's pure profit. It's an expense you have not had to incur. And if you stop and think, how many tickets do you have to sell to turn a pure profit of $6,000? Okay? Suppose the round-trip ticket on Ward Air, which is a charter airline from here to Haiti and back, was $1,000. Okay? Well, and you can get 250 people on the airplane, and you need to save $6,000. That's a good chunk of profit that you've got to get out of every ticket. And typically, it's just not there to be had. Because out of those tickets, you've got to pay for everything. You've got to pay for the mortgage on the airplane, the fuel that you put in, the food that the passengers are going to consume, the ticket agent that sold them the ticket, the baggage handler that put their baggage on the airplane, the stewardesses, the flight crew, the training, the administrative costs that are associated with running the airline. All of those things have to come out of the revenue generated from those tickets. And the profit margin is very small. Okay? So there's no way, even if you fill the airplane with passengers, you're not going to generate $6,000 worth of pure profit on that flight. Not possible. But if you tinker, you can do that. So there's a very strong incentive to do that and to do it right. And in fact, that's how Navtech got started. Ray English had this idea that he could save Air Canada $250,000 a month by figuring out a little basic program that would do tankering. And he didn't know how to program, but his wife Dorothy they bought themselves a Tandy Radio Shack TRS-80 color computer, okay, in the early 80s. Dorothy had taught herself how to program in BASIC, built themselves this little routine, took it into Air Canada thinking that not only were they going to get a nice pat on the back, but they'd probably get a good fat suggestion award for saving the company $250,000 a month. It didn't happen. They basically gave him the brush off, told him to go back and fly his airplanes. They had people, IT people, who could look after anything to do with computers. You know how to do that better than pilots. Okay, so Ray was kind of chagrined. Pissed off would probably be the better word. So he went across the other side of the field to Ward Air's offices and to see if they would be interested. And Ward Air, being a much smaller operation, much more entrepreneurial, they had 6 aircraft at the time compared with probably 150 airplanes that Air Canada had. And you have to remember too, Air Canada's background, they were a crown corporation. It didn't matter what it cost, okay? If they weren't profitable, the government subsidized them, it wasn't a big issue. Ward Air knew the meaning of the bottom line, and their whole interest was to make money. So they were quite interested in this, and they could see the benefits. But they said, wouldn't it be nice if every time we ran a flight plan, we got this information that told us whether we could tanker or not, and if so, how much we'd save, and how much we could take. But there was a problem. At the time, Ward Air were using Canadian Pacific Airlines flight planning system, and they knew that there wasn't a hope in hell that Canadian Pacific were going to modify their flight planning system to include some third-party mom and pop working in their basement kind of a program to do tankering. So Ward Air asked Ray whether or not he thought they could build a flight planning program. And Ray, not knowing what was involved, said, yeah, I think we can do that. So he went home and told Dorothy, and I don't know if she had a fit conniption, she should have. But they spent the next year in their basement in Elmira figuring out how to build a flight plan. And that's how Navtech got started. In 1987, in the spring of 87, they finally had a demonstrable alpha version of this thing, which ran on a Tandy 6000 desktop micro with 8-inch floppy disks and a 30 megabyte hard drive that sat in a big box on the floor. Really amazing. It took 7 full minutes to run a transatlantic flight plan. Time enough to go for a coffee break and have a smoke and come back.
But it's still better than 2 hours. Once we get my head in it.
Absolutely. Yes. And for its day, it was really amazing that they were doing this. They had figured out how to ingest wind forecasts and bring all of this stuff in, allow for the creation of routes, the loading of performance data, and figuring out how to average winds along a track. And I mean, they really did a lot of work. And I think, to their credit, they recognized right from the start that they were going to need a multi-user, multitasking kind of operating system. And so they started using Tandy's version of Unix, which was called Xenix. And it was all written in BASIC. And they were doing things that they were told could not be done in BASIC and Unix at the same time. But they did it in, again, largely because they didn't know they couldn't. So, but they really, they set the groundwork, you know, on a really solid footing. And Ward Air decided to buy the system basically at cost. And what they gave to Navtech was a real live, real world environment for the testing and development of a flight plan program. So that was our very first customer. And as I said, that was in the spring of '87. In October of the same year, we upgraded to digital equipment. We changed from the Tandy to a deck box, Micro X2, I believe it was. And the time to calculate a flight plan went from 7 minutes to 7 seconds. And the guys on the dispatch desk were just blown away. They didn't believe that it could possibly have done it that quickly. You know? So they were very suspicious that something had to have been missed. You must be doing lookup tables or something. You couldn't actually be calculating it that fast. It wasn't possible. Well, that was for the first few days, and then after that, 7 seconds began to seem slow again. People's appreciation of time changes or gets customized very rapidly. So that was, history. 1985, they actually got started on this whole idea. So it was '87 that Ward Air was installed. 1988, September, along comes American Transair. Use these 3-letter codes all the time to identify airlines. All airlines have 3-letter codes. They're not necessarily, American Transair seems to make sense, right? Well, guess what this is? Miami Air. Sure. Okay, TSC, Air Transat. Royal, oh, hey, that's good. Atlas Air. GTI.
VRT. VRT.
VRT, yeah.
Everett.
Air. This is Everett. There's something in it, but they don't necessarily seem to make a lot of sense. GTI has something to do with the parent company being Giant, something or other. And I think the parent corporation for Miami Air is Buskers. So that's, there is some, if you look deep enough, you find that there's generally some meaning to it, but nevertheless, they're kind of strange. Okay. Now I mentioned to you that American Transair had this unusual business plan where they would keep an airplane and cruise on sort of hot standby in case another airline needed a supplement. And it was because of them that we had to develop the MTTA, the minimum time track stuff, because up to that point we did not have that capability. In fact, we did not have an airways database on the system. We had waypoints and airports, but if you wanted to go down the airway that runs across Canada from Halifax to Vancouver is Jet 500. Okay? And it's got waypoints along the way. Okay? Mirabel, North Bay, Sudbury, Lakehead, so on and so forth. all we had in the data file at the time was a list of waypoints and a list of airports. And you built a route, and you told it that I wanted to go jet 500 from here to here, from here to here, and it believed you. There was no way it could verify whether that was correct or a bunch of crap. It just did it. Okay. Well, obviously, if you're going to build routes on the fly, that's no good. You've got to have an airways database to know what airways you can fly. So now we're in a situation where we need an airways database. Okay, so we have to add that. Now, there's thousands of airways in the world. Remember what I talked to you about, the Air Act 28-day cycle? These damn things change. Okay, and how were we keeping the waypoints up to date at this point? We were doing it manually. Every day, every month when new charts came out, we'd look down the charts to see if there's anything new. Well, that was okay. Wasn't great, but if all we were doing was looking for waypoints, it was at least doable, particularly since we only had one customer who operated in one small area of the world. Okay, but now imagine doing that for the entire world, and we have to do not just waypoints, but airways as well. It's starting to get to be a problem. So, not only did we have to devise a way to create the MTTA, we had to build all of the underlying data files to support it. Okay, and we had to get an electronic source of that data so that we could do this automatically. And also to create the data file management stuff that would ingest the new data and modify the old, so that we weren't having to hand key it all in. Okay, so this was a huge development project, and we did it. And the guy came up from American Transair. His name is Mark Doherty. You may encounter that name from time to time. He's still with them. And he was going to do sort of the acceptance testing and make sure that this was okay before we took it down and installed it. Their home base is in Indianapolis. And he says, this isn't any good. Because what we had done was said, you're starting from, say, Toronto, and you're going to fly out to the first waypoint, which is the YYZ VOR. Okay. And you're going to fly to Miami, which here's the airport identifier, and it has a beacon here called MIA. Okay, so you just run from this waypoint to that waypoint, you run the MTTA. He says, well, that's all well and good if at Toronto there happens to be a YYZ identifier or beacon, and at Miami there's one that's called MIA. But if you go to Indianapolis, okay, here's the airport, KIND, and the closest beacon is VHP. So what am I going to have to do? Every time I want to do something like this, I got to go back to my maps and figure it out? This is no good. So what he wanted was every airport in the world virtually publishes things that they call standard instrument departures. Okay? Specific routes that take you from the airport out to some point on an airway. Imagine, if you like, that the airways are just sort of a cobweb of airways in the sky. And the airports are on the ground. And the SIDS are a way to get from the airport up to this network of airways. Okay? At the far end, we have similar routes which are called STARS, Standard Terminal Arrival Routes, which take us from an airway into an airport. Okay. Oh dear. Now all of a sudden we've got two new data files that we have to add to the system, build into routes, allow for the electronic processing of it, modify the route analysis program so that it will take all of the possible departure routes into account. Okay? So this was supposed to be delivered in the spring of '88. And it was actually September, October before it actually got done. We had 6 months worth of 18-hour days trying to develop this, make it all work. But it did. Now, you programmer types, if you look at how we name files, okay? The flight plan is like this, right? Standard B 3000 EXE, and all the programs have got a number that, and the number range actually conforms to some kind of activity. Everything in the 3000 range has to actually do with the calculation of the flight plan, but some are for data files, some are for reports, and so on. Okay. STD stands for standard. If it becomes a program that's modified and is peculiar to an individual airline, then you'll get something like AMT B3000. Okay? We had a special program for them. Now what does the B mean? Well, when we started and delivered this to Ward Air, everything was STDA. And we had to make such a big change to accommodate all the things that Ward Air, or that American Trans Air wanted, that it became the B system, AMTB, because we'd added airways and SIDS and stars and all of the other things to make it work. And it was a huge change, and we called it STDB. And there's never been an equivalent change that's ever made us go to STDC. So you can imagine the magnitude of that particular change. Okay. Enough of that. So, what was our concept here? Okay, where did Navtech see itself in the market while we were doing this? Well, if you look at the market was really divided up into 3 segments, okay, of potential customers. There was big airlines, there was medium-sized airlines, and there was small airlines. Real easy, right? And if you look at historically, where did these guys get their flight plans? Okay? Well, the big airlines did it themselves. They had the megabucks that could buy mainframe computers and pay the wages of the hosts of people needed to manage mainframe computers. And when I went to military college, the last year they installed an IBM 6012, I think it was. Maybe that wasn't the right number, but it was an IBM box. I mean, it filled a room 3 times the size of this place. It cost over $1 million to put it in. There were white-jacketed folk that ran it, and if you wanted to run a program, you did everything on punch cards and took it down and put it in a little slot. You never got close to actually touching the computer. Okay. Well, I've got a computer on my desktop now that's probably got 10, 100 times the capability of that monstrosity. But that's just the way things were back then. And it took big bucks and lots of people to run these things. Okay? Well, the big airlines could do that. So American Airlines, Continental, United, British Airways, Air Canada, Lufthansa, they all produced their own computerized flight planning programs. Okay? How about the little guys? Okay, the guys in the middle, with like Ward Air, 6 airplanes, 12 airplanes, 15 airplanes. They couldn't afford this. They didn't have $1 million to shell out for a mainframe computer. So what did they do? Well, they had 2 sources. they could do one of two things. They could buy surplus capacity from one of the larger airlines, or they could go to another company who had created a flight planning system in order to sell its services to other smaller airlines, which we would call service bureau. Okay? There were two problems with that, though. If you use the services of a large airline, you are basically a victim to their priorities. You are low man on the totem pole. And a classic example is one of our early customers was Nation Air, a small charter outfit that was based in Montreal. They had been buying their flight plans from Air Canada. And because they were a charter outfit, they often had new routes that they wanted to fly. They had an opportunity to fly. And I can remember the one incident where they had a requirement to go from Paris to Nice in France. And they went to Air Canada and said, we need a route down from Paris to Nice. And we'd really like to have it tomorrow. And Air Canada said, well, we don't fly to Nice. We do fly to Marseille, if that's close enough. Not quite. But if you want, we can build you one to Nice, but it'll be 2 weeks and cost you $100. Okay, so there's a big timing issue. There's this being nickel and dime every time you need to change, and you always have to stand in line for improvements, because if they don't need it for their airline, they're likely not going to do it for you. There was another bigger issue. Virgin Atlantic was using British Airways. Okay, and what British Airways could now see was that Virgin Atlantic was flying out of, say, Kingston, Jamaica at 0900, flying to London Heathrow with 400 passengers, charging, I don't know, let's say $510, and filling the airplane. So what British Airways would do was depart at 08:55, okay, and charge 500 and suck off all of their revenue. Okay, because they knew what the good routes were. They could tell from the payloads these guys were putting in where they had the most passengers, what time they were leaving. It's easy to figure out what they were charging. Just phone up and ask for a ticket. Okay, so fortunately for Virgin Atlantic, they twigged as to what was happening and launched a lawsuit against British Airways and got a nice big fat settlement. But it makes you wonder how many other airlines went bankrupt before they figured out what the hell was going on. Okay, so there was a risk involved here of using somebody else's service. The problem with the Service Bureau was twofold. First of all you got was a flight plan. You send in your request or dial up and put in your information. You get back a flight plan, end of discussion. No reports, no scheduling, so you can't have it all set up to do these things. You've got to crank in the information for every single flight all the time. Okay? So, and the other problem associated with it is that it was typically done on a cost per flight plan basis. So every time you run a flight plan, so here's the number of flight plans, and here's the dollar cost. Every time you're in a flight plan, the cash register rings. Okay, so now what that does is it inhibits dispatchers from doing more test flight plans because it's going to cost them. Okay, so they avoid doing those extra flight plans, which might save them several $100s, because to do an extra flight plan is going to cost $5. Okay, so there's a problem that way. The other thing is the only way that you can cap your costs is to stop flying. Okay, which, since most airlines are in this bracket, have growth plans. They want to get to be big airlines, okay? They're only here because they're on their way up. So this was another problem. Over here were the guys that could not afford even the service bureau. Okay, they got 1 or 2 airplanes, and guess what? They do these things manually, and that's where they stayed. Or they developed their own little in-house Mickey Mouse program to do it for them. Okay, so there've been quite a few of those. This is where we saw ourselves. This was Navtech's market. And the whole idea was to provide these guys with the same kind of capability that these fellows had in terms of independence, control over their own destiny, nobody looking in to see what you're doing, but the ability to build your own routes, go wherever you wanted, whenever you wanted, and do it now. Okay? So that's where we were. And the other thing that we thought was really good was that, I mean, originally, to be able to do this, you had to spend $1 million to buy the mainframe to do it, right? Well, now we're down to $100,000 was the cost of the hardware to be able to do this, okay? And the cost was dropping. At the same time, the capability of computers was going up astronomically. And we thought this was wonderful, and that we would have people beating a path to our doorstep, trying to get this kind of independence. Well, we were wrong. What we didn't realize was that airlines are horribly conservative. Okay, you think they're all on the leading edge? They got new shiny airplanes, and boy, they've got the best there is. Yes and no. They are very, very conservative and very cost conscious, and they don't want to do anything that's risky. Airlines hate risk. And this, while it looked good to us, looked really bad to them, because why should I spend $100,000 today to get this kind of capability, which 6 months down the line is going to be only worth this much, not even that, and I could have bought this kind of capability, okay? So this is really bad. I'm spending a lot of money, and I'm going to be left with obsolete equipment in no time flat. I'm just going to be left in the dust. So what I would rather is that you, Navtech, buy the equipment, okay, and you keep it up to date. You have that expense, and take it away from me so that I don't have to be bothered with it. I just want to have better and better capability at the user end. Okay? And so it turned out that this was really where the market was. Not on the in-house standalone systems, because people didn't want to make that investment in the hardware. They would rather have had a service bureau. Okay. Well, that turned out to not be so bad. We did in fact sell a couple more of these things. Let's see, 1990 we sold Nation Air in Montreal. About the same time, 1992 I think it was actually. In 1991 we got Australian Airlines in Melbourne, Australia. Was quite a switch. In 1992, we got Emery Worldwide down in Dayton. Now, each one of these was a different acquisition. Okay, Nation Air wasn't that different really, because it was about the same size, did the same kind of routes as Ward Air. But Australian was a lot different. Okay, we dealt with a charter airline that went long distances. Their average stage length was 6-7 hours, okay, transatlantic, or from Vancouver to Hawaii, long distance, big airplanes. Okay, Australian was flying small airplanes, 737s, on 1 hour hops, completely scheduled, okay, multiple flights, and So a whole different set of problems in terms of making the system work for them. But it did, and we did it. And then along came Emory. Well, Emory looks the same, right? They fly DC-8s, 4-engine transport airplane. Same kind of airplane Nation Air was flying. But again, it was different because Emory is express package, right? All of their airplanes come into a hub at 2 o'clock in the morning or some damn fool time. They offload, they shuffle the cargo, they put it back on the appropriate airplanes, and whoosh, they all go out. So what have you got here? You've got no more flying in a 24-hour period, but it all happens at the same time. All of the flights come in, they all sit on the ground, they all go out again. Boom, boom. Okay? So again, a whole new set of problems to deal with in terms of how do they contend with being able to do all of those flight plans and make those payload changes all at the same time. Okay. And then this was sort of marked the watershed where we started to get in to doing the service bureau stuff. And I lose track of the dates here, but our major service bureau contract was CKS, Connie Coletta Air Services in Ypsilanti. They were subsequently became American International Airlines, and then they got bought out by Kitty Hawk International Airlines, and at the end of April they ceased operations. That was too bad. They've been a good customer for a lot of years, and we just talked them into, we were on the verge of signing a contract for the new graphical user upgrade. Oh well. In 1993, we hit another landmark. When we were competing for the Emory contract, there were two vendors. One was CompuFlight, and the other was Navtech. And CompuFlight had been the vendor of flight planning for Emory. And CompuFlight thought that they were a shoo-in for this renewal of the contract. But the difference was Emory wanted a standalone system. Okay, they did not want to be on a service bureau basis anymore. They wanted control, and they wanted to be able to modify it and make it different for them. And so we won the contract. Well, at the time, CompuFlight were losing customers. Okay, they were sort of in declining mode, and the fellow who was the majority shareholder sort of saw the writing on the wall, that if things continued to go the way they were going to lose market share to us, and eventually he would own all the shares of the company, but it wouldn't be worth anything. So he decided this was a good time to sell up and move on. So he offered Ray to buy the company. Unfortunately, Navtech was next best thing to bankrupt at the time, and if we had not got the Emory contract, we would not have been in business any longer. Okay, so we had no spare cash floating around ready for this big acquisition. But they managed to work a deal whereby it went something like this. We sold the rights to use the Navtech software to CompuFlight, and with that money, we bought controlling interest in CompuFlight. So it was sort of a convoluted triangular kind of a deal, but it happened. In presto, we owned CompuFlight and all of their customers. Now, CompuFlight had taken quite a different approach to flight planning than we had. Okay, I mentioned to you that most service bureaus, you put in the information, you got back a flight plan, end of discussion. Okay, and Navtech's approach had been quite different. we wanted to have it schedule driven. Okay, to integrate it with weather and NOTAMs. What are NOTAMs, anybody?
What's there?
Notices to airmen, right. What are notices to airmen? What do they mean?
It's something you should note often if you have work on a runway at a particular airport.
Right. If there's a radio aid to navigation or an approach aid that's no good, or the runway's been shortened because there's construction, something that you as an airman need to know about if you're going to go flying someplace. Okay, that's all NOTAMs are about. And of course, before you go flying or file a flight plan, you need to check that the weather is okay and that the airport isn't closed for an air show, or that the runway that you're planning to land on isn't 5,000 feet shorter than you think it is. You know, all of these things are important. Okay, so you need this information when you're creating the flight plan. And what we were trying to do is build an integrated system that as you went through the flight plan, you got this information. Once you've got it, you need the ability to transmit it. Okay, so we had a messaging capability because we needed to be able to transmit a flight plan to air traffic control and out to the crew and anybody else down the line who needed information that this flight was coming. Okay, which now gives you the ability, you've got an independent messaging capability. You can set up a little program which will allow you now to transmit messages over these telecommunications networks to anywhere in the world. Okay? And if you want to send weather and NOTAMs, you can grab those, stuff them in the message, and send that as well. Okay? If you now capture all of the, now you've got the schedule information, you've got the planned information that you got in terms of how many people did you plan to have on the aircraft, how much fuel did you plan to burn, how much cargo were you planning to take, how long was it planning to take. Okay, and now when the flight actually goes and takes place, you can capture all of the information that said, well, there were actually only 132 passengers, we had 5,462 pounds of cargo, we burnt 133,405 pounds of gas. All of these things you can capture, and now that allows you to generate reports. Okay? So I can now generate reports that say what flights were delayed, how much they carried, which aircraft burned more fuel than they were planned, and now I can even correlate fuel burns to captains and track which captains are chronically burning more gas than planned, okay? And get some control over the organization. So that was Navtech's philosophy, and we call this thing FOMS, Flight Operation Management System. We kept trying to come up with a name, but it always got stuck back to FOMS. Okay? Until we did the GUI and renamed it Aurora. So, the one thing that CompuFlight had that we did not have was the ability to generate a flight plan based on a message. Okay? The only way our system worked was that you had a terminal that was connected through some phone line or freedom relay link or some communications back to our computer or to your in-house computer if you were one of these guys. Okay? Whereas the CompuFlight approach was send a message over those telecommunications networks, they'll parse it, process it, and send back a flight plan. Okay? So the problem was when we bought CompuFlight, they were running on old General Electric? No, not General Electric. Data General mainframe computers, okay? But the guy who owned the company and who owned these computers was getting rid of them, okay? And we did not want the expense of trying to port the old Data General code, which was written in Fortran, into C or anything else. I mean, we just didn't have the time or the capability to be able to do that. So what were we going to do? What we did was we decided we would dispense with the Data General stuff, we would trash all other code, and basically we would build front end, which was identical to theirs in terms of the user interface, but marry it up to our computation engine. So when they put in their inputs, our calculation would actually do all the calculations and spit back the return to them. Well, it sounds pretty straightforward, right? Well, it wasn't. And as the further we got into it, the more difficulties we found. And this transition was supposed to take place originally in April of '93. And we rescheduled it for May. And then we rescheduled it for June, July, and August, and September. And on the 1st of October we said, fuck it, we're doing it. And we did the transition on the 1st of October. And nobody slept for the first 2 days. And we had a few unhappy customers. We lost a few, but we retained most of them. And the transition happened. Okay. The next big watershed for the company was when we developed the graphical user interface. Because what we were realizing was that it didn't matter how competent or how good your calculation engine was. The perception was that it was antiquated because everybody was going Windows and this was still a text-based dumb terminal, okay? And it didn't matter how good it was, it didn't look good. And ultimately, the people who were making the decision and writing the checks were not the guys on the desk who were having to use it. They were the guys further up the food chain, and to them, what was important was that it looked modern. Okay? So we added the graphical user interface. And in fact, it's been a tremendous boon to us. We in the first 2 years of its existence, we acquired more new customers than we had in the previous 5, 6, or 7 years. Okay? Because it does look better. And not only does it look better, but indeed it is better. Because although the interesting thing is that in adding the graphical user interface, we only added a single data file to the entire system, which is quite remarkable. Everything else was there, but the GUI made it easier to acquire or access the data. For instance, if you were in the flight plan in the old version, which is still there in the back, you know, all of the data files are still managed through the old FOMS dumb terminal type alphanumeric screens. But if you wanted to, for instance, find or select a different captain, or select a different aircraft while you were in the midst of doing a flight plan, the only way that you could go and see what was available was to actually get out of the flight plan program and go to either the aircraft program or the crew program and look around to find out what was available. Okay, well, that's no longer the case. Now, directly from the flight plan, you can pull down drop-down lists and make your selection. Okay? And you can get access to weather and NOTAMs and maintenance items and a whole host of other things directly just by clicking on certain fields. Okay? So it's made access to information a whole lot easier, and that's been really crucial to being able to sell the product. Because ultimately what's really important to the dispatcher is access to information. Okay? Everything that our customers do is very time dependent. And that's one of the reasons that all our data files have been stored in flat ASCII files. Why haven't we gone to Oracle or some third-party data management system? Because it's absolutely crucial that if there's any kind of problem, we can look directly into the data file and fix it without going through another layer, okay? Or without involving the customer in acquiring some kind of additional license or hardware fee. So it's been really important that we've got that control over the data, because time is of the essence. When you've got a flight, an aircraft loaded with 400 people, it can't go anywhere if it doesn't have a flight plan. Okay? So come hell or high water, you've got to be able to compute that flight plan. And that has really been the philosophy that's sort of driven everything that we do. Make it easy, make it work. Give the user control over everything. We could make the system completely automated, right? You put in your schedule, it calculates the flight plans and files them. You never have to lift a finger. The ability, the capability to do that is there. But you need to be able to give the individual dispatcher control over everything he does, okay? To change the cruise mode, to change the altitude, to change the route, to change the amount of fuel that's required when he lands, to change the alternate, to change anything he wants, and to make it easy and quick to do that, and reliable. And that's the other part of the thing, is you've got to have a system which is really accurate, because guess what? If it's not accurate, what do the crews do? They're very quick to recognize that it's not accurate, and so they add more fuel. They carry what they call granny gas, okay? And guess what? Carrying more gas costs a lot of money. So if you want the crews to carry the amount of fuel that you say on the flight plan is going to be necessary, you'd better be accurate, and so that they have a high degree of confidence in what you're telling them, or they're not going to board just that amount of gas. They're always going to take more. Okay. Now, the other thing that I found is really crucial to our success in this business is customer support. I think that I never realized this. I've been with the company now for 12 and a half years, longer than the only person who's been here any longer than I have is Dorothy, who was the co-founder. Everybody else, there's only 5 people in the company when I arrived, and the other 4 of them have all. Three of those 5 have gone away. Where was I at? Customer support. When I first came here, what I was doing was user manuals, okay? And then I got involved in performance data loading, program testing, training customers, and over the years, I think if there's anything that's had to be done, I wind up doing, short of actually coding the programs. So I've got a good depth of understanding about what goes on. But what I really didn't understand until fairly recently was just how crucial our support desk is. We had one guy here who used to be a dispatcher with Ward Air, and then when they got gobbled up by Canadian Airlines, he came looking for a job with us, and he was on our support desk out here. And he used to call me up at 2 o'clock in the morning with these damn questions about this, that, and the other thing. I always found him to be a real pain in the neck. You know? And then one day he retired. And we had customers, people who came up from the States when they heard he was retiring. They made a special trip up here and presented him with a nice little airplane and a plaque and a nice little thank you award. And I thought to myself, why are they doing that for this pain in the ass? Okay? And I realized then the reason was that he was there to help them. It didn't matter whether it was 2 o'clock in the morning or what the nature of their problem was. He would dig down and find somebody who could give him the answer so that he could help them through it and get them to understand what was going on and be able to do what they needed to do. Okay? And that was vitally important. And what really drove it home to me, a couple of months ago, or 6 months ago, I was down at Tower Airlines in New York, and up in their ops board was a little cartoon. Okay? And it showed 2 guys in a rowboat. And this guy's on the oars, and this guy in the back's on a cell phone. Okay? And the caption was, tech support says, try rowing faster. And what you have to realize is that we're sitting on a rock up above the water, right? Okay? And the real final touch on this was somebody had written across here in pencil, SS on-site. On-site is the name of our rival Jeppeson's product, which is what they are using. Okay? So this was a real slam at the support, the kind of support that they were getting in the system they had. And it was the lack of support that they were getting out of that system that drove them to us and why they became our customer. And time and again, that's what we hear from customers. It's not that the other people don't have an acceptable product. They do. Okay. But they don't support it well. And if we're going to survive, we not only have to have a good product, but we have to have superior, excellent support. So in all your dealings with customers, and whatever you're doing in the creation of a program, make sure that that's uppermost in your mind. Here endeth the lesson. Any questions? Well, I'm sure you will have. And as I said, I've been with this company now longer than anybody but Dorothy. So, if you do have questions, usually a good person to come and ask. Now, if you want to know anything about the code, don't come and ask me. Right?